Hello friends. So before we start our video, let's think about some questions here first. So if we look at the screen, and before we start, you should have already watched the video and read the article that I gave you the links for, and the links are also below in this video. Okay, so before we get started on that, let's think about, so what are two activities that you love doing? So what is it about those actions or those hobbies or those activities that make you so passionate about it? Okay, take a moment, just think about that. So what are two things you love doing, and what is it about that that makes you so passionate about it? All right, and how often do you concentrate on something with zero distractions? So no notifications on your phone or your device, your computer. No calls, no messages. You don't have like a YouTube video playing picture in picture in the corner. How often are you fully concentrating on something? And according to the video and article, what is flow or flow state? Okay, so have a think about that for a moment. So flow state then, or flow. So this is, as described in the video, as the brain's most productive state. So we can think of it as this magical kind of state. We're right in that middle where it's not too difficult, you're not feeling anxiety, but it's not too easy where you're feeling bored. So it's that magical kind of middle ground, that Goldilocks, kind of not too hot, not too cold, not too soft, not too hard. It's that magical middle ground where your brain can just get into it. So from the reading, let's have a think about some useful vocab. So firstly, we have to drive. So in the article, it talked about drive adrenaline or drive motivation. So this means to push something or to provoke something. So it has a very kind of active feeling, a very active nuance. And we also have hive mind. So hive, we're thinking like a beehive. So think about all of the bees in the hive, kind of their minds are working together. So this is, when we talk about people, we talk about a shared intellect, a kind of shared understanding, a shared knowledge. Okay, we have embody. So this is to give a physical form to a non-physical thing, to embody something. So for example, you might embody love or charity or something. So through actions, you are giving like a physical form to something that is abstract or non-physical, like charity or love. And in the article, it talked about time dilating. So dilate means to spread out or widen. So for example, if your eyes dilate or your pupils dilate, then the black part goes absolutely massive. Okay, so in this case, they talked about time dilating. Okay, so time feels like it's stretching or widening. So you kind of lose that sense of time. Okay, so we have to drive something. We have hive mind, we have embody, and dilates. which is this. All right, so think about these questions for a minute. So have you ever felt time dilate? So what was that situation? When did you feel like time was kind of stretching with you? And what drives you to dress well? What drives you to make an effort at university or your job? What drives you to be polite? And what drives you to do your hobbies and interests? Have you ever felt that you are embodying a task? So you are literally becoming part of this task. It's quite a philosophical idea. You're kind of joining with this task. So what was that situation? And during group work, have you ever experienced the hive mind? So have you ever felt like you were all joining your intellects together? Okay, so think about these questions for a minute. So I'll be quiet so you can think about it. Okay, so 1 minute, please. All right, well, according to the article that we were reading, we can think about the flow triggers as being external, internal, group, and bonus in this case. So the external triggers can be high consequence. So this is sometimes referred to as high stakes. So there is something important is at risk. For example, an important exam would be a high consequence external trigger. So the consequences of doing badly or doing well at that exam is motivating you to try harder or to try your best. So novelty in this case refers to something which is new. So wanting to have new experiences, for example. Okay, so complexity, unpredictability, deep embodiment. The internal triggers. So clear goals, unambiguous feedback, the challenge skill balance, which we'll come back to in a moment. Concentration on task is an important part of the internal trigger for flow. It's impossible to have flow without concentration. And curiosity, passion, purpose. Autonomy means being able to work alone. So for the group flow triggers, shared goals. Okay, so if you're working in a group, as many people do, whether you're in education or at work, it's all group work, right? It's very rarely that you're working completely alone. So to have a shared goal, to have a direction that you're all trying to go is super important. And again, you notice complete concentration is really important for flow. So some sense of being in control. Equal participation, right? So I'm sure we've all worked in groups where not everybody was participating equally. You had a couple of passengers on the bus, so to speak. So open communication, moving forward. Okay, the idea that you are developing something and you are moving forward. My favorite bonus trigger is the desire to prove something or prove something wrong. Okay, so basically the desire to be right about something can be a very powerful trigger for flow. So let's take a look at some of the more interesting or important triggers for the flow state and for motivation. So let's think about that challenge skill balance. So the activity you are doing should be challenging yet within your perceived abilities. The imminent anxiety for the activity should not paralyze your system, and it should not be beneath your current level of skill, so this can breed boredom and apathy. So again, in a sentence, it's the Goldilocks section, right? Shouldn't be so difficult that it makes you nervous, shouldn't be so easy that it's boring to do, doesn't challenge you at all. So the trick is to try and find something which is of that level. Now, many years ago, Stephen Krashen came up with this idea, and this was specific to language acquisition, but I think it fits this context too, which was I+1, which is input plus 1. And so for Krashen, this meant that for language learning, the input the student receives should be their current level plus 1. Okay, so not plus 10, not plus 5, but plus 1. So current level plus like a little bit. Okay, so sounds great, right? Sounds good on paper. So think about what the pros and cons of this approach might be when it comes to language study or language learning. Okay, so take a moment, just have a think. Well, the pros are that it sounds like a good idea, right? That if you're language learning, it should be your current level plus a little bit, and enough to be challenging, not enough to be impossible or overly difficult. One of the negative parts about this is that what is plus 1? Like, how do you know that it's plus 1? And also, a lot of people are learning language in a group situation, a group context. So in a classroom, for example, every student is going to have a different plus 1. So what is plus 1 for student A might be plus 5 for student B, and plus 10 for student C, or minus 5 for student D. So it's one of those things. It sounds like a good idea, but kind of relatively hard to do. Okay. However, I do think that with a challenge, that the way to keep it interesting and to get into that kind of flow state is to kind of make it just a little bit challenging. Okay, so you could be trying to use more complex language, more vivid language. You might be trying to write faster or longer or more detailed, or any of these things. So there should always be like a little bit of a challenge in there. All right, next up we have complexity. So the complexity of the activity should not drive your system into being overwhelmed. Okay, and again, notice drive. So drive your system into being overwhelmed, yet it should not be so simple that your brain decides it's not worth paying the extra attention to. So you must be clear on how to navigate this complex terrain. Okay, so first up, let's think about that word then, complexity. And think about what is the difference between complexity and difficulty? There is a difference. So take a moment and have a think. What is the difference between difficulty and complexity? Well, difficulty is about the amount of effort it takes to complete a task or to do a task. So for example, you are writing all the lyrics to a song while it is playing. Okay, so you're listening to the song and you can clearly hear the lyrics, but you have to write the lyrics as you hear them. So the language in the lyrics might be pretty simple, but to write at that speed is difficult. Okay, so difficult is the amount of effort needed to do something. Complexity is the level of thinking required for the task. So for example, the number of moving parts in a sentence. So for example, a basic sentence like I play soccer, I live in blah blah. Not many moving parts. You know, you're changing a verb, maybe that's it. With something like passive voice, you know, like it has been done by somebody. There's a lot of moving parts in there. You've got extra verbs in there, you have tenses that you need to change. Yeah, so the complexity is the level of thinking. So let me show you this little taxonomy. So this is by Bloom. This has been updated several times. This is one of the newer versions. So at the bottom, we find the least complex thinking skills. So remembering and understanding, they are the least complex. Okay, and again, it doesn't mean difficult, because if you have to remember 100 words, that's difficult, but it's not complex. Okay, so two different concepts there. Okay, so applying. So for example, if you are doing a gap fill activity, or you're changing, for example, change this sentence from simple present to simple past. You're just kind of applying that knowledge and changing play to played, go to went, etc. Now, as we get into the more complex parts, so analyzing, so this is where we break a concept into different parts. We're identifying the relationships, or we're seeing how things create the whole. Evaluating and creating is being the most complex. Okay, so creating, so writing a short story or creating an advertising campaign, this is the most complex. So when it comes to that kind of flow state, it's good to have a kind of range of thinking skills involved. So the lower order thinking skills, like remembering, understanding, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not bad. They are essential, but not necessarily complex. Okay, so shared goals. So the group must know the direction in which they intend to steer the ship, and there must be a shared vision and a compelling mission that brings the team together. So a dash of competition can help those goals. Okay, we don't want too much competition, but a little bit can actually be quite useful. Okay, so this was for the teamwork triggers. All right, and we also had equal participation. So they should contribute equally. Okay, and again, I mentioned we've all had situations where that has not been the case. Okay, so if the level of skill is too low, it may impede the emergence of the group flow. Okay, so that basically means that one member is kind of stopping everybody else from getting into that flow state where the ideas are just kind of happening and the work is kind of coming along nicely. Okay, so this leads to motivation, okay, which is one of the key factors for flow state. So if we look at the Gardner and Lambert kind of concepts, there are basically three types of motivation. So we have instrumental, which is also known as extrinsic. We have integrative. Okay, so think like the word integrate, integrative. And we have intrinsic. Okay, and we saw these kind of words in the quadrant flow state triggers. We had intrinsic and extrinsic. Okay, so instrumental or extrinsic. So this is motivation that is external. There is some kind of external reward. So for example, it might be a grade, a promotion, a driver's license. Okay, so there is something that you are being rewarded with or something that is at risk. So for example, losing a good grade or losing a promotion, this is also external motivation. Okay, so again, also known as instrumental motivation. Integrative. So integrative, this comes from the desire to join, interact, or remain part of some kind of social group. So a good example is if you think back to your school days, maybe there was a time that you wanted to belong to a certain group of friends. And to belong to that group of friends, you maybe changed how you talked, or you changed how you dressed, or you changed what you were interested in. Maybe you pretended to like a certain soccer team or a certain pop group in order to be part of that group. So this is integrative motivation. Okay, so the motivation to belong to that group or remain part of that group or interact with that part of the group, that's the thing that's motivating you to act. And finally, we have intrinsic. So this is an internal reward. So it's the pleasure of doing it. Right? It's the pleasure of completing the task or the pleasure of just improving at something. So basically, if you've ever learned to play an instrument or learn to paint, learn to draw, any kind of hobby is basically an intrinsic motivation. That the joy of improving is kind of what you're getting from that experience, right? There's no real external motivation necessarily. So think of some other examples of tasks for each motivation type. And think about what motivations have you experienced in your life. Have you experienced all three? Or is all your motivation instrumental or integrative? Okay, so just take a moment to think. Okay, so let's reflect a little bit on what we've done. So do you think it's possible to have more than one motivation type for a task? So how? So is it possible to have integrative and intrinsic motivation? Or is it possible to have all three motivation types? So what motivation is the most enduring? And is it possible to have that kind of motivation for every task that you do? So what's the longest lasting motivation type? So how do you re-motivate yourself when you start to feel less enthusiastic? Okay, take a minute, just think about those. For the first question, absolutely. And frequently, people have motivations, more than one, for doing something, and you could definitely have all three motivations. So, for example, you may be taking an exam for something and you want to get a good grade. That's an external motivation. You might be learning a language because you want to go to that country, or you want to have friends from that place, or you want to communicate with that group of people. Well, that would be integrative. And you may genuinely love learning that language. You want to improve, you want to expand your vocabulary and your ability to communicate. That would be an intrinsic motivation. So absolutely, it is possible to have more than one motivation. Intrinsic tends to be the most enduring. External factors can disappear quite quickly. So the desire to get a promotion, for example, once you get that promotion, that motivation is gone. Or once you've failed to get that promotion, that motivation is gone, at least for now. So intrinsic tends to be the more enduring. Is it possible to do that for every task? Well, it depends on the person. If you're the kind of person who can find pleasure in small improvements, then yeah, absolutely. The third one, that's kind of up to you. So let's think about flow. So there are some activities we can do to kind of get into that flow state. It's kind of like a warm-up activity to get your brain ready to get into that flow state. So let's have a go. So we're going to try this. So firstly, you're going to need to get maybe some paper, and you're going to divide it into 4 sections. So in the top quadrant, we're going to have did, next saw, next heard, and next doodle. So doodle is a small, quick drawing. Okay, so in the first quadrant, you're going to write 6 things that you did yesterday. Okay, they don't have to be major things, they don't have to be life-altering things, but just 6 things that you did. Think of 6 things that you saw yesterday. Write 1 thing that you heard yesterday. And draw 1 thing that you wrote. So it can be from anything that you have written in these sections, and you're going to draw 1 of those things. Okay, so let's just take a quick minute. So I'll be quiet. Okay, 6 things you did, 6 things you saw, 1 thing you heard, and then draw one of those things. Okay, take 1 minute, please. Okay, so you can do this activity whenever. It just kind of warms up your brain. You can take as long as you need for it. Another way we can kind of get into that flow state is we're going to take 5 minutes. Okay, so you're just going to write for 5 minutes. That's it. So get a nice clean piece of paper or a new page of your whatever writing app that you're using. Okay, so here are the rules. So number 1, you are gonna put all your devices into do not disturb. Okay, you can turn off notifications, so there should be nothing that is distracting you. Okay, so every time your mind starts to think about something else, it resets that flow state to 0, and you have to kind of build back into it. So what you want is no distractions. Okay, so all your devices into do not disturb mode. Okay, next thing is do not stop writing. Okay, it's 5 minutes, but do not stop writing. Don't edit. Okay, so don't stop and go back and try and change something. You know, if you wrote crusty, but you think, maybe is crusty the right word? Maybe I can change that. Don't, just keep going. So don't stop, just go, 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 go. All right, don't try and be perfect. Okay, we're not trying to write a masterpiece. Okay, we're just trying to write for 5 minutes. You don't need to use a dictionary if you don't know words. That's fine. It's okay. Just write a different word or a word that kind of is the same, or you could put it in your language, just that one word. Okay, so all devices do not disturb. You don't want any distractions. Don't stop writing. Don't edit. Don't go back. Don't change anything. Don't try and be perfect. Don't use a dictionary. And you're going to start with these words, I remember. Okay, so start with I remember. So we're going to do 5 minutes. Okay, so starting with the words I remember. Okay, so here we go, 5 minutes, go. Okay, time's up. So hopefully you got something down at least, and that you were just constantly writing, you're not editing. So if you want, take a few minutes, have a look at what you wrote and kind of see how you feel about it. So hopefully without distractions you could find that you were starting to get into that flow state, you were starting to not over-analyze, and just the ideas, the content was just kind of coming out of you. Okay, so that was a brief look at flow and motivation and how we can get into that flow state, what are the different types of motivation, and we did some exercises to kind of get our brains ready for that Goldilocks kind of context where we can just write, we can embody the task. All right, thank you for watching.